Hey guys, it's Patrick. So as I promised, I'm gonna be uploading a video every Wednesday and Sunday. I thought I'd start out with one about making bread because I talked about it a lot in the last one and it was really rambly, and I figured this would be a good way to test out my new video software that I downloaded for my laptop. Um, Anyways, I also think that baking bread in particularly is something that people shy away from, and it's really, really super simple. It is a time complicated process, and hopefully, with the power of editing, this will be done in 15 minutes. But in reality, this is a project that you would want to take on your day off. I don't have a bread maker. I do everything by hand, kind of. I have a stand mixer that I like to use. Um, and it's kind of the easiest way to do it. So we'll be showing you that. So real quick before we get started, the recipe I will be using comes from the cookbook Baking in America by Greg Patton. Um, it's a great cookbook. A friend sent it to me a few years ago, and I really like the bread recipe that's in it. The bread we'll be making tonight is actually buttermilk bread, which is comparable to like a store-bought white bread or wheat bread. I'm really a big fan of it, and I think it's a great recipe to use. So the first step in making any really good bread is having a starter. There's a few other terms that you can use for it, but I like to call it a starter. It's not a starter like when you say sourdough, because that would typically grow and the yeasty flavor would develop over a few days, but I'm going to call this a starter for simple purposes. So let's start with that. So to get any good bread started, you're going to need a few basic ingredients. You're going to need your water, in most cases, for a simple bread like a baguette. We're making a buttermilk bread, so I have 2 cups of milk, yeast, sugar, and that's not the flour for the starter. It's actually off to my right, but we'll get to that flour later. So to start, we want to create an environment that is conducive to activating the yeast and letting that come to life. So I've got, again, 2 cups of buttermilk. I am using buttermilk. It is a buttermilk bread. And then 1/2 cup of warm water. I guess you could do these separately if you didn't want to, but really you just need the yeast, or the water, the liquid mixture, to come to a nice human body temperature, or in the danger zone if you work in the food service industry, so it will grow. In most cases that would be a bad use of terminology, and you would want to keep food out of the danger zone. But again, we're trying to culture this yeast and get it to grow. So I'm going to put this just on a low heat. Okay, the next step while that's warming up is we're going to get the mixer ready. Again, you can do this by hand. Making bread by hand is a little difficult. I had to do it when I first started out in the food service industry, and it wasn't a lot of fun. It ended up being a sticky mess. And now that I'm more of a grown-up, I like my stand mixer. Again, we're gonna end up using this, which is a dough hook that'll move the bread, stretch the gluten proteins that are forming in there, and get those springy and spongy, so it'll activate like bread. But to start with the mixture, I'm just going to attach my paddle attachment in there, right there. So while the milk is still warming up, as I mentioned, we're going to start getting a few basic things. I'm going to put 2.5 teaspoons of yeast into that bowl. And then I'm going to put 3 cups of flour into there as well. So the dough mixture looks like it's about ready, and again, I think I just deleted the first part of this, but what I've done is I've simply just added the milk once it's up to a nice 80 degrees. The recipe actually specifies that it should be between 105 and 110 degrees. My general rule of thumb when making bread and activating it and getting the water and milk, or either or, ready, is that it should be around body temperature. You don't want it to be too cold so that the yeast doesn't activate and grow at a pace that you want, but you also don't want it to be so hot that it kills the yeast. I always like to think of, would you put this in a baby's bottle? So it needs to be lukewarm again. What I'm going to do, and what you're not going to see, is I'm going to scrape this off, because waste not, want not. There's lots of good stuff in there for the yeast to activate. And then I'm going to cover this with, I'm actually going to cover this with a towel. You want to cover it with cling wrap, but I'm out of cling wrap, so I'm going to use a towel to cover that. I've put it in a nice spot that's going to be warm while we're waiting for that to go. We're going to let this sit for about an hour and a half. I'm going to run dishes. So that countertop right there is perfect temperature. So again, we're going to move on to the next step, and you can see my steel in the clip. But in the next step, we're going to add the rest of the ingredients, and then we're going to let it rise. We're not going to call it proofing. Proofing is something different, than that'll come later in the process. But we're going to get the rest. We're going to take these ingredients, which is 1 large egg, 4 tablespoons of butter, or 1/2 stick, 1/4 cup of sugar or wheat germ, and then the 4 extra cup of flours that I actually used to be the first 3 cups of flour. I'm just going to add these ingredients in. I'm going to add the flour in little by little because, again, I don't want to have a floury mixture. One ingredient that I forgot to mention was the salt. The salt is really crucial to this. It plays a huge part in the flavor. Without it, the bread will be flat. You don't want to go super heavy with the salt. I'm using a tablespoon of kosher salt. If you're going to be using table salt, you want to cut this down by half. So we're going to add that in slowly with the flour and the butter and the eggs and the sugar. All my ingredients have been successfully incorporated into the dough. Not successfully quite yet. I'm going to let the mixer go for about 10 to 15 minutes on a medium speed until it becomes like a nice loaf of bread. If you don't have a mixer, or if you're scared to do this on your mixer, this is a hard recipe for stand mixers. Mine actually will probably knock itself off. So if you don't have one of those, or again, you don't want to break your mixer, I'll show you how to knead it by hand in a little while. But first I'm going to get this going and let it go for a few minutes, again, 8 to 10 minutes, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. This is a really hard thing for the mixer to handle. So mine is about 5 or 6 years old, and it was struggling with it a little bit, so I actually decided to pull it off and knead it by hand. What I've done is I've just turned the dough out onto the counter. Most times you would want to add a little bit of flour to the surface so it wouldn't stick. Mine isn't sticking too much, and it's not going to cling to the counter, so I'm just going to grab the dough in hand and turn it over just like that, moving in a circular motion. And I'm probably going to end up doing this for about 3 minutes because my dough's almost there, but it's not quite ready yet. You can stop now. So I've been kneading my dough for about 3 minutes, and it should look like a nice smooth baby bottom. I've got it in the shape of an egg right now. This is how it's going to look in the end, but to know if the dough's done, we're going to pull a little piece off, and we're actually going to do what's called a window pane test, and that's simply just pulling a little bit of it and stretching it as far as you go. And I'll show you what that looks like when I got it there. I did my window pane test, and the bread actually had a hole in it, and I'm actually glad this happened. It ripped sooner than I was ready to. What I'm simply doing is I'm just simply pulling the sides apart, just like that. I'm doing it with 2 hands normally, but it's not quite where I want it to be, and as you can see it's pulling, so I'm going to end up kneading it for just a little while longer. The window pane test, and my first attempt after kneading, it ripped, but now it's right where I want it to be. It's almost translucent. I can stretch it pretty far. You can see the colors of my fingers poking through. There's an alien baby popping out of there because I just forced that. So the dough's ready to go. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to reincorporate that, make it look like a giant egg again, and then put it in a bowl for another 2 hours until it's doubled in size. Okay, so the dough is about doubled in size, and for comparison, this is what it was sitting on when it was just a small little lump. It's been about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So what I'm really quickly going to do is I'm going to punch the dough down in on itself and get all that air out. Just like that. From here I'm going to cut the dough in half, and then we're going to roll it over. But first I'm going to let this rest after I cut it in half for about 10 minutes. It's really important that you let it rest so that you can flatten it out and roll it into the shape that you would like. In about 10 minutes, and I've cut the dough in half. I've got about 2 equal pieces right now. I'm using a cloth towel right now so you can see this. So I'm just going to do one really quickly, and and then I'm going to do the other one off camera because it's really hard to get something that you guys can see everything I'm doing when I'm working with a light thing. So I'm just pressing the dough out. And again, we've let it relax for about 10 minutes after we punched it down. And we're just going to let it go. I'm just going to roll it up into a little ball like this, folding it like the sides up, and I'm just going to roll it in on itself. And this is simply how, if we were making a baguette, we would do that, but this one's going to take a little bit of a different pinching the sides up right now that they're staying together, and they don't seem to want to stay together for some reason tonight. But that's that. Alright, now that that's rolled up, I've got this handy dandy little loaf pan. I'm going to it's kind of in the shape that I want, but I'm going to roll it in, just drop it in there and flatten it out into shape. It's really important that you're getting all the air out because, again, when we put this in the oven, one of the things that's going to happen is the gas from the yeast that we activated earlier is going to rise, and some of it's going to escape, but as the top of the bread forms, a crust will form, and that'll get trapped on the inside. And I hope I'm explaining everything correctly, because sometimes I just do what I know how to do. Alright, so now you can see I've got two just about equal sized loaves of bread. Not really, kind of maybe. I'm really bad at portioning things out. But they're in the pans. I'm going to cover them up with another towel for about an hour. When I mentioned earlier proofing, this is actually what we call proofing. This is the final stage that we have to let the dough rise a little bit in the shape that it's going to go into the oven. Everything is just kind of mixing and rising beforehand. It's a lot of terminology, but when we talk about proofing bread, this is actually what we're doing. Again, proofing is the final stage where you're letting something rise in the form that you're going to bake it in. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and get my oven set to 375 degrees. I'm going to let this go for about 1 more hour, and then we should be good to go from there. Alright, so it's been about a half an hour. I pulled the bread out of the oven. It's still hot as blue blazes, but I've obviously used oven mitts. But one of the things that we can see is that I didn't quite let the bread proof long enough. So it didn't get relaxed, it didn't get soft enough on the side so that when it rose too fast and gas escaped and it actually ripped. That's not too much of a problem, professionally speaking. It's probably not a good thing, but, you know, we can hollow out this bread and make a stuffed peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But what we're really looking for is when we tap the bottom of the bread, we're going to be listening for a hollow sound. So I'm going to say that's pretty hollow. And the bread is done. Hey guys, it's been a long night making bread. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully this helped you make some bread. As you can see, mine didn't turn out perfect as it should have. I'm kind of notorious for underproofing my homemade bread, but you know, it's still going to make a great PB&J for me in the morning, and anyone who actually knows me knows that I will eat the crap out of this bread. I'll see you guys on Sunday. Bye.